Hello, and welcome back to the Diverse Thinking, Different Learning podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today, we're actually continuing our discussion about how to effectively use these summer months. And we're focusing today on how to reinforce and accelerate reading skills, especially for children who struggle with reading. The National Assessment of Education report, also known as the nation's report card, found that only 35% of U.S. fourth graders are proficient readers. For children with reading-based learning struggles, the gap widens without timely and effective intervention. So I am thrilled that joining me today are two individuals who have helped thousands of children become confident readers. Dr. Devan Truch, founder of the Reading Foundation and creator of the evidence-based Discover programs, and Devan Kublik, director of the Reading Foundation's Los Angeles office, with over 25 years of hands-on experience supporting struggling readers. Let's get started.
Millions of kids struggle with learning, processing, and social-emotional difficulties. These challenges interfere with their ability to reach their full potential. Dr. Karen Wilson is here to help. Her extensive background in pediatric neuropsychology and higher education have prepared her for this unique mission. Listen as she delivers content to inform, educate, and empower parents and educators. This will enable you to identify challenges that kids face and get them on the road to achieving their full potential. This is Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus.
Dr. Truch and Devan, thank you so much for being here today.
You're welcome, and thanks for inviting us.
I'm really excited to have you both. I think one of the things I mentioned in the intro was that only 35% of U.S. fourth graders are proficient readers, and that's a significant problem. And it's one of the reasons I wanted to have you both on the podcast today because, this is probably going to air in the middle of summer where parents have taken their vacations, kids have had some downtime, and now there might be some concern about, should I be doing something right now to prepare my child for the next academic year, especially if they've struggled with reading, in the last academic year, or in the summer, there's a resistance to reading. And I know that Dr. Truch, you've seen kind of the landscape of reading instruction shift over the years, over the decades. And I'd love for you to kind of talk about, what you've seen in terms of the change and what helps students who may be behind in reading or be reluctant readers.
Okay, that's a great question, of course, and it's a very broad-based question too. So I think the way that educators and school systems have dealt with teaching children to read has changed over the years. And every sort of few decades, there's a sweeping change of some kind or another. So we go from sort of phonics-based to, say, a whole language-based to balanced literacy. And now we're back to a phonics-based kind of approach to reading. So there's this sort of old wine and new skins kind of idea that flips back and forth. And it can be really frustrating for the educators too, because then, of course, they have to keep up with all the curriculum changes that these departments of education demand. So when I was a school psychologist, my interest in reading was really on those children who were delayed readers, so things like dyslexia, specific learning disabilities, and so on. That was all in my repertoire in my training, in grad school to become a psychologist, which I did for, school psychology work for, 12, 14 years, something like that, before I started the Reading Foundation Clinic. Now, in that period of time, the whole language approach to reading was sweeping the world, really, at that time. And so it was a very, very enticing philosophy and theory. And ironically enough, there was, I think, one single piece of research to back it up. And it was done by the guy who sort of invented the whole idea. And it was a few years later proven to be completely false. So, science sometimes just doesn't pave the way. People ignore facts. They just get into ideas and ideologies and like that. So now, don't get me wrong, there are many, many positive things about whole language, especially with its emphasis on comprehension. But when it comes to the initial building block, teaching children how to actually read words, they were way off the base because they felt that children could learn to read with minimal to no instruction in letter sound correspondences and just had to basically guess their way through the system. So most initial readings started with children memorizing a few core sight words, 100 words or so, that just to get them started, and then getting, say, minimal introduction to any kind of phonics. But then the rest of it was context-based. So we know, 10, 15 years later, how disastrous that was for children because there was no direct instruction on how the English code actually works. So it was basically a mess. So then we reverted now to something that was more balanced. Now, balanced literacy, again, very enticing components to it. And again, its emphasis on comprehension, written language, oral expression, like that. I just love that. I mean, that's a very, very, very excellent approach to school and to learning and to language arts in general. But again, they just got a little ways into, we'll call it phonics, for lack of a better word. And so you only had to maybe show one letter and a sound, and then the child could still guess at the rest and so on. So it's even though they thought it was more balanced, and it was a bit more balanced in the original sort of whole language approach, it still had many, many shortfalls. But I think that's still a prevailing philosophy, is balanced literature right now. Now, along comes this science of reading term. Again, it's sweeping the nations, and people are buying phonics books by the gazillion. But we have to ask ourselves, phonics is a general term that relates to letters and sounds. So the visual and the auditory, the sounds. Now, the predominant way to teach phonics for centuries really has been to use letters and then to figure out how the letters represent the sounds of the English language. So what that has done is created hordes of rules. You get, for example, when you analyze the English spellings that way, you get two vowels go walking, the first one does the talking, as a kind of a generalization. Unfortunately, it doesn't work enough to be a good rule for students because there's too many exceptions right away. The same with the silent E rule. So we'll take one good example. They teach the silent E rule. So the letter, when there's an E at the end of the word, it makes the letter say its sound. Well, okay, so you read this word C-O-M-E, and the student says, oh, that's comb. There you go. So again, about 50% of the time, it just doesn't work. So how is that a good reading or teaching tool? And the fact of the matter is it is not. And yet all of our evidence comes from that type of approach to reading and to phonics. So we have this speech to print phonics approach that has dominated for centuries. Now, in the last little while, last 5 years or so, I've come to appreciate that there's another way to teach the code, the English code, and that is from speech to print. So in other words, let's start with what the phonemes of the English language are. So arguably there's 44 phonemes. Okay, now each phoneme has a specific visual spelling representation to represent it. So if we teach the child the phonemic structure of a word and then show them how the letter or letters represent that sound, we have what turns out to be a much more parsimonious way to teach the code. Now, isn't that interesting?
It's very interesting because it's still rooted in that phonemic awareness.
And it's rooted in our own language. So, I mean, that's what writing is all about. It is a representation of how we speak. There's vast differences between writing and speaking, but still it's a representation when we write something of how we speak. So if we teach the child the idea that the words they speak consist of small units called sounds, technically phonemes, that each phoneme has a specific kind of representation that could be 1 letter, 2 letters, 4 letters even for that single sound, then we have some options to teach the child. We don't have to teach them rules. We have some options to teach for the sounds. So that's what we do. That's what really good speech to print programs do. And it turns out last year there was a speech to print conference, and I was one of the speakers. And it turns out they're in the United States in particular, but around the world too, there are some excellent speech to print programs available that teachers are being trained in that get excellent results. And then we can apply those to general school systems. So a program like Sounds Right, for example, is widely adopted in British Isles in England as a curriculum program for kids to be introduced to the English code. I think that's fantastic. So, and then we have the uses for general education of speech to print, and we have those for specific ones, like intervention programs. So the intervention programs that I was involved in as a school psychologist before I knew all this other stuff I was just talking about was whole language. So I bought into it actually for a while because it's very, very enticing, until I realized that kids were still placed in resource rooms, we'll say, with IEPs taught by whole language teachers and they still weren't making any progress. So it's like, well, what's going on with these guys? So there must be something wrong with them, the child, right? So that was my job. Diagnose what this child has as a problem, as a disability. Then we can give them a code. We can give them an LD code or an SLD, or we can call them dyslexic. And then that's the gateway to the resources the school system has, which will be what? Well, an IEP, a placement maybe in a resource room, maybe a little bit of small group work, tutoring, maybe. But with what? With what? Maybe a bit more phonics. Do you see what I'm saying? So these children I saw going into resource rooms in grade 2, by the time they finished grade 12, their reading was not appreciably better. And unfortunately, that seems to be the trend that researchers like Joseph Torgerson have shown us. Like in the 90s, he had a beautiful article in Journal of Learning Disabilities that showed that children in grade 1 who were delayed readers, and we're talking about delayed readers, by the time they reached grade 6, they really had not gained in their reading scores, say on a standardized test, from grade 1 to grade 6. They just flatlined. So those are the kids that are most in need of very serious intervention.
Yes. And I think that's the really important piece, because, we think about, what the research has shown and lets us know about what interventions work. I think as we're recording this in summer and preparing for summer, parents are looking at also hearing that students with reading difficulties, and you talked about those who are needing intervention, can lose several months of progress over the summer without a structured intervention program. But we know that with intentional, individualized instruction, they can actually make accelerated gains during this period. Of course, we want them to have rest. The podcast I recorded before was about making sure we have balance. Students need rest. Their brains need rest. But they also, if they are behind, can make use of summer for boosting reading skills. Devan, I know you've worked with countless students. What have you seen in terms of using that summer as a valuable time for boosting reading skills? Because parents are asking themselves, how do we leverage this time effectively? They're not in school all day. How can we boost reading skills during this time?
Yeah. Well, what we do is work individually with students for an intensive immersion, right? And so gaining that benefit through the summer of getting that intensive immersion time in to boost all their reading and spelling skills and really focus on what they need to do, it's huge, right? And it can make all the difference.
Yes.
Yeah. So when we say intensive, I'm going to just talk about something called dosage. So intensive dosage to us is ideally 4 hours of one-to-one structured intervention in the area the child needs. Now, how we determine that is with our battery of pre-testing to begin with. So that's important too, because you need to identify the most pressing issues for the child. And we need to identify what areas of literacy that affects. Is it just reading and spelling? Is it comprehension? Is it written language? Is it just general language? So we have intervention programs we've developed that we can remediate many of these processes in tandem or in combination, in various combinations, depending on how the profile looks. So put it that way, right? So then the intensive immersion is one we know from clinical experience and from our data that brings the best results. So the ideal immersion is 4 hours a day, 5 days a week for whatever number of weeks and total hours that the child needs, which we have some excellent metrics to determine. And ideally, that's what happens. Now, the ideal is also interfered with by the school system, because many school systems do not want their child, of course, to miss any curriculum time to come to a clinic of any kind, right? So that's a catch-22 situation. So I won't kind of deal with that right away. But I mean, to me, it's like, okay, we become the language arts program for the morning, we'll say, for that child. What is that child actually missing if they can't read? If they can't read, they're not going to get reading instruction that's going to make a difference, usually, in the school system. So anything they actually miss might be sequential, like mathematics, which, is not as hard to catch up on a daily basis as, say, reading is. But in any event, the summertime is the time to make hay while the sun shines, is the way to put it, I think. So those children are not in school already. They're not missing any school time. So if they come to us for half a day, some of them can even come up to 6 hours a day, then we can make up a lot of ground. And that's what our stats show us. And that's what actually some good research shows us too. So that when you get them in a proper intervention, that flat line I was talking about accelerates. It goes like this. It's amazing. You see amazing growth, and that's what we see in our kids, and it starts happening for them from like almost day one. Suddenly, they're coming to you and saying, or to their parents and saying, hey, I can read this. I'm actually reading it. It's for the first time. It's like a eureka experience for a grade 5 student, for example. So yeah. I mean, that's the time to do it, and I think that's my message to parents. This kind of intensity, of course, is costly. There's no interventions that aren't going to cost. But at the same time, it's way more costly to ignore it or to try to find a cheap solution. And when I say a cheap solution, you might find somebody who's willing to work with your child for an hour a day, once a week. That's honestly just not going to cut the mustard. Even if it was our program, I would not recommend it because that's just not enough dosage. So this dosage thing is an important concept, and it's a great opportunity to use in the summertime for students, especially those who are delayed, because we can, within a few hours, well, not a few, but reasonably number of hours, make a significant impact, get the child going in the right direction, and that sets the stage for the next school year and for their future. And then, of course, we monitor them and they come back. Sometimes they need refresher immersions with us or just some maintenance work. But, we're careful about what we recommend, careful about how we administer it, careful to follow up. We're eager to work with other professionals to, embellish and use whatever they suggest is needed for that particular child. And, of course, with the neurodiverse climate these days, too, we have to take some of these things into account. So I do want to say that we have a lot of experience with kids who are neurodiverse. So yes, there's, of course, adjustments you need to make for somebody who's on the spectrum, for example, or somebody who's ADHD or somebody who's, high anxious. And we've managed, in most cases, to work effectively with those students.
And I think that's really an important piece. I mean, there's quite a few things that you said that are really important, but I think, again, really seeing summer as an opportunity to be able to invest that time into reading instruction, spelling instruction. And it sounds like it's really guided by where the student is, because when you talk about dosage, some students might have a mild issue, some might be moderate, but some might be more severe, and that will dictate how much time is needed in terms of the intervention. And so again, summer is a time, like you said, you don't have to pull them out of class. You don't have to have them be in a group setting. And we can talk about, the one-on-one instruction over the summer versus a group-based or camp-style literacy program in the school for an hour a week or an hour a day. The intensity is going to be very different. And you're also going to see the gains are going to be very different as well.
Very good points you've just summarized there, Karen. Can I call you Karen?
Yes, that is fine. Okay. That is fine.
Yeah, so I think the interventions boil down to two things. One of them is dosage and the other is type of intervention. So dosage, if you go, say, 100 hours with a program that's a print-to-speech-based program, you will get results because there's high dosage and there's some gain in standard score points that the child will experience in that period of time. However, if you switch to a speech-to-print program, such as ours or some of the others that exist, your scale is going to be that much greater. So those two things, I think Torgerson said years ago, keep on stuffing them and stuff them with the right stuff. so, so, so you have to have those two things. That's, that's well, it's a decades-long challenge for school systems. And like you said, when you started the program, that 35% who still are functionally illiterate is a horrifying statistic. So I think that can change if we get systemic change in the system that implements some of these kinds of programs with a right kind of dosage at an early age. And then that should start, limiting the number of students who are severely delayed in the first place. There will still always be other challenges, but that would be a good start to get that number down.
Yes. And we need to. I mean, a while back, I had Sally Shaywitz on the podcast, and she was talking about, that we're in the midst of a reading crisis, and that was over a year ago. And that we're still in a reading crisis, when we look at those statistics. And yet we have the research and the data that show us the importance of phonemic awareness, of phonics, of fluency, of vocabulary and comprehension as critical components of effective reading instruction. So we know what to do, you know what to do, but we have to get the information and the intervention into the hands of the students who need those, who can benefit from those interventions so that they can get the gains. Because like you're saying, I think you alluded to the fact that parents were reluctant to pull kids out of some of the classes to do this instruction. But again, you need to be able to read in order to read your science book and your history book and your geography book. So how much are you benefiting from being in those classes and reading that material if reading is a barrier to access to the additional information?
I think that's, again, a really excellent point. And it's a point that's made too by a lot of the adult students that we've worked with in the past. They've said, yeah, I've learned to bypass, accommodate. I've learned to deal with my spelling issues, for example, but I sure wish I never had them. I sure wish I had this that you're giving me now a long time ago. It would have made my life so different. And that's true. I think the emotional scars that, students receive from not being able to read, they're horrific. They amount to definitely PTSD symptoms for some people. It's just awful. So, we are scarring our children by not giving them the right start. Now, I don't mean everybody. I mean, everybody's going to react to anything differently, right? There's always these tremendous individual differences. But in general, we know not knowing how to read is not a good thing. Knowing how to read is a really good thing. Very simple.
Yes. And we know that when you struggle with reading, it impacts your mental health. Like you're saying, where there's a lot of research on mental health issues in students with dyslexia. And, parents are listening and they want to support their kids. For parents who, are at home with their kids this summer, and you might have parents who bring your kids to work with you at the Reading Foundation, are there things that they can do at home to further support a child who is struggling with reading? Because parents want to help. They want to be, involved in their children's success and development and skill building. What can they do at home to support their children?
Okay, an excellent question. It's hard to answer, but I will answer it. I'll answer it this way. If they come to us, then there's probably not a whole lot that they can or should do, because we have the expertise that the child needs initially. Now, once the child gets reading and get going and they need some maintenance, let's say after a few weeks of our intervention, absolutely we can get them involved. We can show them materials. We can show them how to correct errors for reading and spelling and like that. But without that initial introduction on I'll call it the right track, then it can get pretty dysfunctional pretty fast. That I learned that very quickly when I first opened the clinic in Calgary in 1990. Parents wanted to be involved. They wanted us to teach them how to do what we were doing on a daily basis and reinforce it with homework at home. So I found out very quickly this did not work, because those parents, lovely as they were, as motivated as they were, they still did not have the specific training they needed to teach that child. So as soon as they ran into a problem with the child, it just got dumped on the child. It became a very not good system, I'll put it that way. So we've learned to lay off of that kind of thing. But there are points when that is definitely appropriate, when it's needed, when we can involve other professionals, other parents, or other tutors, whatever, that we can involve them. We can give them materials at that point. But then we'll sit down with them and show them how they can use it. And hopefully they have enough knowledge of their own that they can implement it in the way that we think they should. Yeah.
Right. And that's a really valid point. And also we have to also keep in mind that not everyone has access to a program like yours, and parents, want to be able to do something either because logistically they can't make it, or they're listening to this podcast and they're nowhere near a reading foundation center because they're in rural America
Right.
somewhere. And at the same time, parents want to, even if they can bring their kids to a program like yours, at home, they want to maintain and improve motivation and engagement of their reluctant readers. And so we want them, I know they're always looking for ways to be involved in some way.
I think that, again, Karen, the answer to your question really is you need to be involved in a thoughtful way with somebody or someone who knows exactly what I'm talking about and can impart those principles onto you. So to answer in a broad way some of those issues, we do have Zoom sessions, and we have worked with kids in actually Asia, China, Australia, and the United States with Zoom. So we can do with some children, again, not all of them, but some children are fine. So we can do that much. But the thing, what happens to so many children who come to us initially is they are completely turned off. They've already learned at a very early age they can't do this thing, right? So they're turned off, they're inward, they don't even want to come to the clinic, mainly because they're scared that this, again, is something that's not going to work. So the transformation that happens almost within a few days of this intensive dosage is remarkable. I mean, Devan can attest to that. These children within a few days become different. And by the end of the program, I don't know how many times we've heard from parents, you've given me back the child that I had before they went to school. I mean, it's an incredible psychological, emotional transformation that takes place with these kids once they're set on the right path. Now, it doesn't solve all their problems. They still have other issues to deal with. They still might need to learn how to spell more effectively. Maybe they still aren't comprehending as well as they could. Maybe their written expression still needs help. But you've set them off on a pathway now that is going to lead them to a greater chances of success immediately and also really for the rest of their lives. So we've got some great long-term stories about how that happens for kids who have been severely delayed. And I had the opportunity not long ago actually to talk to a very, not Sally Sayewich, but a very prominent person in the reading field. And she looked at some of the data that I was showing on degrees of delay. So the most severely delayed readers, for example, those students who start at, say, the first percentile, we can change their scores to very close to the low end of the average range in X number of hours. And she was looking through all that. I had charts for reading, for spelling, for comprehension, for language like that. And she just looked at me at some point in the conversation. She said, Steve, these results are really good. So I thought that was high praise from somebody who knows the landscape. So no, I'm not trying to just blow my own horn. I'm sure I know there are other clinics who have, excellent outcomes, who can show us some good data, but it is hard to find. It's hard to find that data because if you're a little, researcher, a little practitioner in your own little office or whatever, probably you're not going to collect pre and post data and for your students. You're going to be happy if they show progress and parents are happy and like that, right? So it's really hard from a parent point of view to have a consumer reports of what works.
Yes. And I think one of the things that you're highlighting is the fact that, progress doesn't just depend on time spent. It depends on the quality of the instruction. And that is so key, right? Because I've had students who've worked with tutors, which might be well-intended teachers who just have the kid read the same paragraphs over and over and over again until they become more fluent, but that's not intervention. And it doesn't address the underlying issues. And it's important for the program, like you're saying, target the root causes of reading struggles. And Devan, I'd love for you to talk about, Steve had mentioned, the impact on the student. We're talking kind of clinically in terms of what it looks like in terms of pre and post scores, but what is the impact on that student, that child, that teen who comes in and leaves with greater skills? What does that look and feel like?
Yeah. I just heard from a parent recently where her daughter had attended over spring break, and what school had been seeing before she came to us over spring break was totally a shy child that would not speak up in classroom. She came to us over spring break and then continued to attend. But when she went back to school after spring break, the teachers said, wow, what a difference. Like, she's a completely different child, right? And I think that's because we gave her the tools that she needed, right? And she was having a lot of trouble with reading and stuff with spelling. She just didn't have the tools. So they put books in front of her. She couldn't read it, right? So we gave her those tools. And all of a sudden, she started to have a voice. And I think that is huge, right? Like, for a little girl to go from shy to being an outspoken child in the classroom and then wanting to read a book in her classroom, it's huge, right? So, yeah. And that's one short story that I can say in the moment, right?
Right. And that's means so much to that child because it builds their confidence, right? They feel more confident. And when you feel confident, then you also feel more competent. And then you have a greater likelihood of believing that you can read that next book and that next book and that next book. And that just continues to build their self-concept and improves mental health and increases their likelihood that they will, again, attribute their success in reading, their development in reading to the hard work that they've put in. And that pattern helps them in all of the things that they do because they believe if I put this much work into math, I'll become better at math. If I put this much work into organizing and planning, my executive functioning skills will improve. So again, making that connection between their effort under the supervision of someone who is teaching them these skills and tools that will help them, helps them to internalize that they can do the work if they work really hard at something, and they will see the benefit of that hard work.
Indeed, nicely summarized. If they could work hard and if somebody knows what they have to work hard at.
Yes.
That's great. And it would be really different if this was a once in a while story.
But it's all the time.
In our clinics, like we've had 35 years of experience at our clinics, and these are common outcomes. I mean, it is absolutely wonderful and very heartwarming for me because that's why I started this in the first place, because I, way long ago, found a piece of research that set me in the right direction of what we needed to teach and how we needed to teach it. And that's been the outcome. So, it's great. Yeah, it's great indeed.
It is wonderful because we're in a day and age where we have access to the information, the data. We can learn from, the work that you have put in over decades, and the research tells us what we can do to help students become better readers, stronger readers, and better students, and access learning and access their curriculum at school. And so it's just a matter of connecting parents and educators with the science and the people who can do the magic, work the magic, and get students to be reading and get them to be fluent readers and readers who can understand the text, because it doesn't matter if you can read it accurately if you can't understand what you've just read.
Correct. Yeah.
So that has to be key.
They can split off as two separate processes, but they do interact with each other too. So again, once we have a chance to assess a child, the screening battery I developed, decades ago, was meant not to be a psychoed, because I could see what psychoeds do. They're very broad-based assessments, and they give you a lot of information in a lot of different areas, but often they do not hone in on the processes that are interfering with, say, word reading or with spelling or with comprehension. So the battery that I created and we're still working on, is still changed when tests are updated or new information is found. But It takes maybe with an hour and a half to 2 hours with a student, and we can nail it. We can nail what they need without giving them a label. We'll just say, okay, you need help in this area. It's delayed by this much, but we expect within X amount of time, this is what you're going to see as an improvement. And there's the plan. And we start putting the plan together. We can separate out what the word reading and spelling issue is compared to the comprehension issue. There may be no comprehension issue. There may be no word reading or spelling issue, which means they shouldn't even be with us. But we can separate those degrees of separation, if you want to call it like that. Yeah. So, and that's important. It's important to try to measure what you know are the components of the reading process, or what you know in your head about what reading is all about is different than what tests tell you. That's the thing. You can slice. I've seen this in many, many kinds of assessments. You slice it up into phonemic awareness, spelling, reading, and then you treat each one as a separate silo. That doesn't work as well either as when you know how it all works together.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think that parents who are listening are hearing that there are definitely things that they can do to support their children or their teens who have been struggling with reading and with spelling and with other language-based issues. It's not too late to do something intensive over the summer and prepare them for the next academic year. And, you both, I really appreciate your time and all the work that you're doing. And I'm grateful for you being here and sharing your expertise with our listeners. I know that there are probably people listening who want to learn more about the Reading Foundation and the services for their children. And if they do, what is the best way for them to connect with you?
Well, there's two ways. I guess they can go to www.readingfoundation.com. So that will give them a good overview of all of our clinics and our programs, and give you information on how to contact us. If you're living in the LA area, we have a good 1-800 number, 1-800-605-9272. And if you want to ask a question of me directly, I'd be happy to give you my email, which is steve@readingfoundation.com. I won't throw in my last name because that's going to lead to too many problems. And I'll reply.
Yes. And we have listeners from all over the world. So if you have other centers outside of Los Angeles, shout them out as well.
Sure. There's Calgary and Toronto and Vancouver, and now Los Angeles. So those 4 clinics, and they're all on the website with different contact numbers specifically for each one.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you again for being here and for all that you do to support students who are struggling with reading and helping them to become better readers, stronger readers, and more confident human beings. So thank you.
Thank you, Karen, for inviting us. That was delightful. And for all your work that you do, for all the parents, especially in the LA area. That LA Nexus, that's a fantastic organization. I'm glad we joined.
I'm so glad to have you in the community. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining our discussion today. If you want to learn more about the Reading Foundation and other resources for struggling readers, be sure to check out the links in the show notes. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus. For more resources, visit us online at childnexus.com.